Welcome scratch builders, welcome gamers to MJ Hobby Corner. I hope you find yourselves well. In this video, I'm going to show a sneak peek of a scratch build for next month. This is the project of the month for February, and I just started writing the zine for February. January's already out, all right? So what I would like to do is show you this scratch build, and then we're going to discuss a little bit about the materials that I use for this scratch build. Now, one of the most important things in this scratch build is that I use mesh. Now, and that's probably a Black Hawk passing by. We do have an airport, National Guard always flies, helicopters. So that's probably a Black Hawk flying overhead. We do have like Chinooks that fly by as well, really loud, especially when they're flying low. So what you hear in the background is definitely a Black Hawk. But anyway, getting back to the model, we have mesh. Plastic canvas mesh is one of the most versatile materials that I've had the opportunity to work with these past 3 years. Now, I started working with mesh more and more about 3 years ago. I've used mesh for other things in the past, things like terrain, for sci-fi terrain and stuff like that to add detail. But it's only about 3 years ago that I actively started using mesh for building models. Now, I use a technique that I call layering of material, or layering, simply layering. All that means is that I sandwich layers of geometric shapes in order to get another more complex geometric shape. Basically, that's all it is. You're just sandwiching layers. So if I'm making the hull of a ship or something, I cut out one basic shape and then use that as a template, cut out maybe a couple more shapes or one more of those shapes, sandwich them together to get the necessary thickness that I want for the scale and the hull of the ship. So that's what I did in this model. It uses that layering concept. So I use that concept of sandwiching layers in a lot of my recent builds, and it's very, very effective. Now, here's the thing I have to say about layering. One of the biggest disadvantages is that layering only works for small scale building. That's very important when it comes to deciding on that technique, is that it works for small scale. Once you start getting into bigger scales, say a 28 millimeter vehicle, right, a vehicle that suits 28 millimeter scale, you don't want to use layering because it's way too cumbersome and you're going to drive yourself bananas, because layering takes all these different layers, and that's how you get the width of your vehicle. And with mesh, this kind of layering also works because the mesh itself is serving as an armature. It's serving as a skeleton for whatever you're building. And the next step after that is you have to skin it somehow. You have to add some kind of skin. I use index cards. They're the cheapest thing that you can use. They work very well with mesh. You can glue them onto the mesh using a white tacky glue, which is very efficient. And it's flexible enough that they can work over certain surfaces, particularly any bends in the surfaces. And if you're using white glue to skin, you have the option of moving the skin a little bit so that things come out straight, right? So you don't want to use hot glue when you're actually skinning the model, because if you make a mistake, you're going to have to peel it off. It just wrecks everything. So using the white glue really gives you the time to make sure it sets properly and acts like a skin over the mesh. The other thing about index card is that it does not warp. That is something I realized very, very early when I was beginning to build models with mesh. Index card does not warp. That's an excellent thing. So as long as you apply a nice healthy layer of glue on your mesh armature, put the index card skin over it, and boom, it works really well. So this model was spray painted. Now, if we look at the model, we see first and foremost there is some motion. You can see the engines. This is the engines moving, pivoting upwards. This is a vertical takeoff and landing craft, a rotor craft, and this is a kind of model that I don't have represented in my collection. And this is why I'm building these things. I also want to build more high-tech helicopters and things like that that may go with this kind of modern theme, right? Maybe not something so much in the future, but something a little more modern. These are kinds of military vehicles that I don't have in my collection, so I build them. And you can also see this build has an interesting detail. There's little pilots, little mesh pilots inside the cockpit, and I chose recycled clear plastic from packaging. This is the really rigid clear plastic. That's what I cut the rotors out of, and I also cut a piece for the cockpit. And you can still see the little pilots inside, and this was a detail that I really wanted. You can see it's not heavily armed. This is a transport vehicle. It's large, and it has the vertical takeoff and landing capability. And the fact that it has the pilots really adds a little interest to it. Okay, so this is a detail I really wanted. It has a little hatch in the rear where supposedly troops do come out. And you can see the mesh troops. These are some of the troops in my alternate history collection, but I'm going to design troop bases that are a little more in line with this vehicle. And then you see the landing gears. Now, again, mesh gives you the versatility that you can add all these details. Landing gears are a little bit, the wheels themselves are a little bit bigger than I would have liked, but that is the scale of the landing gear, right? But it's not bad. I mean, I am not that picky, and as long as it functions and I can set the craft down, the model down on its gears, and it doesn't look too crazy, I don't care, you know? You can completely omit the gears on a craft like this if you wanted to, not a problem. I didn't want to do that because I want the craft to sit on its own if it needs to. The flight stand is made from an old wine glass. It's a plastic wine glass, and it was cracked. So I collected a few of these over the holidays, and I'm going to make flight stands out of these. It's a little bit big. I will admit that's a little bit big, that flight stand. But for a crafter that wants to try this and you want to use this in your games, you can certainly get traditional flight stands. I don't do that because it increases the budget, the stuff that I have to order, or it just doesn't work for me. I decided on the wine glass. It's perfectly stable, and if I like to have terrain that is not flat. And so this works very well to keep the ship on terrain that may be not completely flat. It gives it a lot of stability. So I'm using that. And then you see just that it has a lot of little detail. It's also missing some details. But here's the thing. This is what I recommend for people that are trying to learn to work with this material. When you first begin and you haven't had any experience building with canvas mesh, don't try to add all of these details too quickly. Learn to work with the material, learn to work with the layering technique, and then as you gain more experience, you can start thinking about, okay, I want to add an open hatch and a machine gunner. out of the side hatch, right? Or I want to add some pilots to this vehicle. How am I going to do that? I'm always, as I'm building these things, problems come up and I have to solve those problems. So like, okay, how am I going to make the gears so that they stick well and provide support for the craft, even if those gears are not perfect in scale, but how can I use them, and add that detail to the model? Those are the kinds of things I think about. And very important is, how do I cut my mesh in order to get those shapes that I want so that they can function properly in that detail. So the gears have to be cut a certain way so I can insert the little round bead that is acting as the wheel for the gear, right? What kinds of adhesive do I use? These are all the things that I answer in Scratchbuilder Monthly as I write the article. But for this one of the lovely things about mesh is that you don't have to measure. You can just count lengthwise how many little squares am I going to make the cut. How many squares wide is the structure going to be. And very important for this particular transport, I needed to think about the hull of the transport. That's going to have to be wider, and so I'm going to need more pieces while I'm layering for that hull, and the tail of the ship is going to be a lot thinner. So I need to layer my structure so that I have a narrow tail and a wider fuselage, right? So you will notice that the propellers have to be glued on. They're not glued yet, so one of them is still a little shaky. And one of the things also, again, you'll notice that mesh is really good with these really angular kinds of shapes, right? You can, using a file, you can file mesh, but it's not as easy because it's a flexible material. I usually use my Dremel. Once my pieces have been layered, if I really want to add a little bit of roundness to some of the designs, I can use my Dremel for that, and it does work for that. You have to really apply the spinning head of the Dremel, or whatever filing tip you're using. You have to apply it very carefully. The other thing that I'm doing now, and this is something relatively new, and is I'm using Loctite putty, and this is a sticky putty, and it lasts a very long time. And I use this a lot for painting my models when I'm attaching models to like a little handle or something, and then I can paint them. This material is very good for temporarily putting together the mesh pieces so you can see how the model is going to work. I really love this putty for that reason, because it's temporary. And then once I'm done looking at the model, the skeleton that's assembled, I can pull it apart and decide, okay, maybe I don't like this, or I don't like, the way this fits. Maybe I'll try some different, right? So this kind of putty is excellent. I do recommend that if you're working on vehicles. Now, for the layering of each of the different pieces that I used to make this model, I used hot glue for the actual larger layers. I used white glue for the skin, and anything really small, anything minute, I try to use super glue, right? I usually keep these glues on hand in my studio. That does raise the price a little bit of the build that you're making, but it's worked very well for me because I use very small amounts of these glues, so they do last me quite a few projects before I have to replace them. So we have to think about that as well. I mean, mesh is extremely versatile, and like I said, you can bend it, it's flexible. You can also strengthen it so that it doesn't necessarily bend on you when you don't want it to. It is a very versatile and strong material once you layer it. Designs are subjective. They're completely arbitrary. That's why you as a crafter build or design whatever model you're going to build, design it according to what you like best. And so I made certain choices when I made this model because that's what I want to see in my build. The important thing is not the design of the vessel itself or whatever you're building, it's the technique. And that's what I really emphasize in Scratch Builder. It's getting from point A to point B. How do I make this craft possible? And that's really all it is. Stay tuned for that. All right, folks, I don't want to make this video too long. This was just a sneak peek. Thank you very much for your support. Scratch Builder January is out. February will be out. And again, the technique is what you really want to emphasize, because from the actual technique, you can build any number of different things. It doesn't have to be a rotorcraft. You can build a helicopter, you can build tanks, you can build whatever you want, even mechs, so long as we have a technique that gets us from point A to point B. And for mesh, layering seems to work very, very well in the smaller scales. All right, so that's it. Folks, have a great day. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.